We're learning Kuf Lamed Gimel today. We're starting the last few words on the bottom of Kuf Lamed Beis, Amud Beis. Mamish, the last few words. So this is a conclusion of the Gemara that we learned yesterday. The Gemara here is talking about the halacha of a person that in the place of the bris milah on the arla, there's a nega. So there's a lav, and could be even an asay as well, that you're not allowed to cut off a nega. But when it comes in a place where there's the mitzvah of bris milah, so then you're allowed to cut it off. So the conclusion of the Gemara yesterday was that there's a machlokes between Rava and Rav Safra. Rava says the fact that you're allowed to cut off the bris milah, even in a case where there's a nega, you don't need any pasuk for that. It's a kal v'chomer. What's a kal v'chomer? If you could push off Shabbos for a bris, you definitely could push off the lav of cutting off the nega for a bris. Rav Safra says, no, not necessarily. It could be that we find a certain stringency in the isser of cutting off the nega even more than Shabbos. And therefore he says, you need a special pasuk to teach me that you can cut off the nega from the word besar. You need a pasuk to teach that to me. I wouldn't know it on my own. So the Gemara now brings that this is actually a machlokes tanoim. Let's see inside. V'ha de Rava ve Rav Safra. This argument between Rava and Rav Safra, ta noihi. It's a machlokes tanoim. The Tanya, we learned in the bris, on top of Kuf Lamed Gimel. Besar, when it says in the Torah the word besar regarding a bris, va'afal pi sheyesham beheres, even if it has a nega, yima, you should still do the bris. Divrei Rabbi Yeshia. That's what Rabbi Yeshia says. So the source is the pasuk. Rabbi Yeshia says, Ein tzarech. It's not necessary to have a pasuk to tell me that you can make a bris even when there's a nega. Shabbos chamure doiche. Shabbos, which is more severe. We can push off Shabbos for a bris, tzaras, lekal shekain. When a person has a tzaras in the place of the bris, for sure you can push it off. It's not needed to have a pasuk for this. So that's the pshat of this. So we see the same machlokes of Rav and Rav Safra, Rabbi Yeshia and Rabbi Yonason were arguing about this.
He doesn't hold up the kavachema. Why?
Because he holds that we find a certain severity in tzaras over Shabbos, because tzaras is doicha aveda, and Shabbos and aveda is doicha Shabbos. So it could be that we see a certain aspect that tzaras is more chomer than Shabbos. Okay, now the Gemara is going to return to the whole subject itself about a person that has a tzaras in the place of the milah and he has to cut off the tzaras. The Gemara is going to discuss this itself from a different angle. Mamar, so the master just said over here in the bris, besar afal pisha yesham beheres. We have a special pasuk teaching me that even if there's a nega, you're allowed to make the bris. Yima still does the bris. Divrei Rabbi Yeshia. Frag the Gemara, ha lama likra. Why would I need a pasuk to teach me that you can cut off the nega? Dava shem eskavana. This is the person is doing an isser, but he's not having at all kavana for the isser. The dava shem eskavan mutter. If he's not having kavana, it's completely mutter. He's not trying to be metayed himself. What's the isser of cutting off a nega? There's no isser of cutting off a nega. The isser of cutting off the nega is that you want to be metayed yourself. You don't want to be a mitzayda. This person is trying to be metayed himself of not being a mitzayda. No. What is he trying to do? He's making a bris. All he's doing is he's making a bris. And he makes the bris and the nega comes off. So l'chayr, it's a dav v'shem eskaven and it should be mutter. We learned so many times in the Masechta, and it's not only been a ge'et to Shabbos. We had it by Nazir. Now the Gemara brings it up by this isser of cutting off the nega. If it's a dav v'shem eskaven, it should be allowed. So Abaye explains, so this bris here has to be following the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. The Omar Davashem Miskavin Aser, that if it's something that the person had no kavana for, it's still Aser. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion always. Okay, so this was Abaye's pshat. Rava says, Afil Taimer Rab Shimon. No, we can say even according to Rab Shimon that usually holds that a Davashem Miskavin is allowed. Here, Rab Shimon will agree that there's an issue. We had so many times Rab Shimon would be maida that if it's a case that it's inevitable that the isser is going to happen, even if you're not having kavanah for it, it still will be asr. In this case, if there's a nega in the place of the milah and the person is cutting off the nega, you can't separate from the two. It's inevitable that the milah is going to come off. You can't say, I'm not trying to purify myself. I'm not trying to rid myself from the nega. Let me remain tummy with the nega. But meanwhile, I'm doing a bris. It doesn't work that way. It's psik reisha. It's inevitable. So in such a case, Rab Shimon would be maideh that it's a problem. And therefore you need a special pasuk of besar to tell me that you're allowed to make the bris. Frag the Gemara. Abaye. Now Abaye, that gave a different answer. Abaye said that this is only going according to Rabbi Yehuda and not according to Rab Shimon. Lesle hai svara. Abaye does not hold of this concept that when it's psik reisha, that when it's inevitable, Rab Shimon would agree. V'ha Abaye v'Rava the Omri Tarvayu. We had quoted already before a few times that Abaye and Rava both said that Rab Shimon agrees in a case where it's inevitable that even if you have no kavanah that it's forbidden. So why here it seems like it's an argument between Abaye and Rava. And for the Gemara, Basa de Shama me Rava Savra. After Abaye heard this answer and this pshat from Rava, Abaye agreed to Rava. And from there, at that point on, it's quoted both in the name of Abaye and Rava that they both hold Psik Reisha v'lo Yamos. Even Rab Shimon will agree.
What was the shayla before?
It's a good question. L'chayr Psik Reisha is a pashat svara.
Yeah, maybe because the bris, maybe the ba'eres, but it's not the Yisrael.
But the Gemara brings it up. Why not? It's in the same raga. As he takes off the bris, the nega comes off. L'chayr. Maybe you could argue that the nega is more on the outer part of the skin, and the bris is okay. Maybe. Okay, but the Gemara is going to bring this up also now. Not only b'negeh to bris, but b'negeh to the nega itself. Let's see. The same point, but b'negeh to the isser of cutting off the nega. Others had the same discussion here between Abaye and Rava on the following braisa. So it says as follows: Hishama benega tzaras lishma moed velasais. Be careful with the nega tzaras, not to cut it off. And then the Torah uses the term lasais. What does the term lasais mean? So the Gemara explains lasais siyata isa. You're not allowed to do an action directly to cut off the nega. Avol, the Bach adds the word. You're allowed to do it if you have some kind of a lace or some kind of a band on top of the nega. Let's say you're tying your shoe. Those days they would tie their shoes on top of the foot itself. And you have some kind of a band that goes on top of the nega and it rubs on it and it rubs it off. You're just wearing your shoe and it just rubs off the nega. Siv shal gabe ragloy, and it comes off automatically. You're not taking it off directly by hand. Or another example, u'b'moit shal gabe kseifa. A person is carrying a pole on top of his shoulder, and the pole is heavy, and it rubs his shoulder, and over time, the nega is rubbed off. So then, you didn't take it off directly by hand. You're just doing your work. You're just wearing your shoe. It comes off automatically. Vim avra avra. If it came off, it came off, and you don't have to be concerned about it. That's what we learn out from the extra word lasais. Only if you did it by hand directly. Why do I need a pasuk to say that if it came off this way, it's not an issue? It's coming off in a way, he's doing his work, he's doing his thing, and it comes off automatically. He's not having kavanah for this to happen at all. If he has no kavanah, then it's allowed. So Abaye says, so if Abaye first said, you're right, the only reason we need this extra pasuk is according to Rabbi Yehuda, the Omar, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is, even if there's no kavanah, it's still forbidden. But Rava Omar, and then Rava responded, like we said before, Afilatayim Rab Shimon. No, this could go even according to Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon would agree, even if you have no kavanah, but if it's inevitable, it would not be allowed. And that's why you need a special pasuk of lasais, that regarding a nega, it's only an isser if you do an action directly by hand. Abaye Leslie High Svara, and Abaye does not agree to this concept of psik reisha. Abaye and Rava both said that Rab Shimon agrees in a case where it's inevitable that the malacha will happen, that it's not allowed, or the isser will happen, that it's not allowed. And says the Gemara, Labasa de Shame mi Rava Savra. After Abaye heard from Rava this svara that Rab Shimon agrees in a case that it's inevitable, he agreed to him.
Now, why do we need the pasuk by milah? If you're allowed to lace, show milah.
If what? If you're allowed?
If you're allowed to put the lace over there,
no, by
show milah, which is a mitzvah.
But you're doing it directly by hand. There's a difference. When you're putting a lace, you're just wearing your shoe and it rubs it off. Milah, the fact is, the person is cutting it off directly by hand. No, but it's psik reisha. It's psik reisha. And Rab Shimon would be meida.
So here is psik reisha.
And a chanamim. So what does the Gemara say? The Gemara says in both cases, whether you did it directly by hand by the milah, but you're doing it for the purpose of the mitzvah, and you're einim mechaven. Whether with the lace, you're not doing it by hand, it's just happening automatically, but it's psik reisha. And therefore in both cases it would have been aser. So you need the pasuk to tell me that it's allowed. Both by milah, the pasuk bisar, and when you did it because you're just wearing a shoe, you need the pasuk lasais to say that it's allowed. Now the Gemara goes back to the havamina. Even though the Gemara refuted the havamina, but this is Rashi's pshat in the Gemara. The Gemara goes back to the havamina. Va'abaya aliba de Rab Shimon. Abaye, according to Rab Shimon. So in the beginning we said that Abaye said that the whole pasuk of Besar was only needed according to Rab Yehuda. According to Rab Shimon, which says that Ein Mechavan is allowed, you don't need any pasuk to teach me that you can make a bris when there's a nega there. So according to that, Hai Besar, my Ovidle. This extra word of Besar, what would you learn out from it? Amar Rav Amram, so Rav Amram says, B'oimer lokutz pahertai hu miskaven. What you still would need the pasuk. Before, when the Abaye said that according to Rab Shimon you don't need a pasuk, that's tak in a normal case. In a regular case, a person that's doing a bris and he happens to have a nega there, he wants to do the mitzvah. The nega comes off automatically. He's not having any kavanah for that. In a case though where the person is doing the mitzvah of the bris and he clearly has in mind, I want to do the mitzvah of bris, but I also want to get rid of the nega. He's having kavanah. Even then, the pasuk says you're allowed to make the bris. The word besar says you're allowed to cut it off, even though you're doing the isser of cutting off the nega. Fragt the Gemara, Tainach Godel. This could be true in the case of a Godel. A Godel could have kavana. He's thinking, he's doing the bris, and he also wants to get rid of the nega. That's why you need the pasuk besar. Cotton ma'yikalamema. As we brought before in the Gemara, it says in the Torah the word besar twice. It says it by a Godel and it says it by a cotton. What can we say about a cotton? Cotton doesn't have that kind of kavana. He's not thinking anything.
Will be the mind. No.
1 second. Amar Rav Misharshia. So Rav Misharshia says, "Ba'omer avia ben lokutz bahartoi de benoi hu kamiskaven." We're talking over here about the avia ben, and the avia ben, the father of the son, that's making the bris, or is the one that's telling the male to make the bris, or is making the bris himself, is saying that I'm cutting off the bris for my child, and he's having kavana to take off the nega. So true, the child himself can't have the kavana. But the father could. The father is cutting off the bris with that kavana to take off the nega. So there is kavana here. So then if such a case, if the father is having that kavana, the father shouldn't do the bris. Why would we allow the father to make the bris in such a way that he clearly has kavana to cut off the nega, he has kavana to do an aveda as well? Let someone else do it that will not have that kavana. The Amar Rab Shimon ben Lakish, Rab Shimon ben Lakish said the following rule: Kol mokim shatam moitze esse v'lois esse. Anytime when you have a conflict between an esse and a lois esse, imat yachal l'kayim shnei mutiv. If you can find a way that you could fulfill the esse without pushing off the lois esse, that's the best. Vim lav, only if it's impossible, then yavei esse v'yitche lois esse. Then the esse pushes off the lois esse. So here as well, even though there's the pasuk besar that says that you're allowed to be doiche the issa of the nega to make the bris, but if, according to Rab Shimon, it could be done without kavana, and you're not going to push off the loisesa, there's no reason to push off the loisesa. The father wants to push off the loisesa, the father says, I'm cutting it off in order to get rid of the nega. So let the father not do the bris. Let someone else do the bris, someone that doesn't have the kavana of this aveda. Answers the Gemara, you're right, if the father is here and the father could do that, then it would be, if someone else could do that, that is, if someone else is available, you should allow someone else to do it. But we're speaking about a case, the leka acher. There's nobody else here. If there's no one else here, it's only the father, and the father is having kavana to cut off the nega as well. The pasuk besar is telling me that you're allowed to make the bris in this way, even though you're cutting off the nega. That's even according to Rab Shimon.
Let him not say.
Good. So the chiddush of the Torah is at Yagizakt. So he's, he said that's what he's doing. Okay, so now the Gemara goes back to another detail that was mentioned in the bris that was brought before. We're right in the middle of the Amud of Kuf Lamed Gimel, so it brought the inyan of the fact that Shabbos is doiche, but also Yom Tov. Yom Tov, you can make a bris on Yom Tov, but only if it's a milah bizmana, not if it's a milah shalei bizmana. Oh, Mama, we learned before, Yom Tov eine doiche ela bezmana. Yom Tov will be pushed off for a bris only if the bris is done on the 8th day. Bezmana bulvad. Menana mili. From where do we know this? Maybe a bris should be doiche Yom Tov even if it's not on the 8th day. Remember, Yom Tov is different than Shabbos, and we know Yom Tov is a time that you can do other malachas for oichel nefesh and all kinds of things. So maybe you should be able to make a milah shalei bezmana. Answers the Gemara, Ama Chizkiya, V'chein Tana Debei Chizkiya, was learned in the yeshiva of Chizkiya. Ama Kra, the pasuk says, by the din of Neisar, when you have leftovers of a carbon, or in this case, the leftovers of the carbon Pesach, and it has to be burnt because it's Neisar. So what does it say there in the pasuk? Lo yseisiru mimenu ad boiker. Don't leave over from the carbon Pesach till the morning. But then it says there afterwards in the pasuk again, V'hanoisa mimenu ad boiker. It says ad boiker a second time, ba'eish t'sreifa. You burn it in the fire. So the bris says, She'ein tamud loima, or Achizkiya says, She'ein tamud loima ad boiker. It didn't have to say the word ad boiker a second time. Ma tamud loima ad boiker. Ba kasav litan loy boiker sheni l'sreifase. The Torah here is saying, wait until the following morning, not the morning, the first morning, which means the first day of Pesach. Wait until the next morning, which is the first day of Chol HaMoed in Eretz Yisrael. There's no 2 days of Yom Tov. So you wait until the following morning to burn it. Meaning you cannot burn the Naisar on Yom Tov itself. You can wait to burn the Naisar until the next day. Why? Because it's not something that must be done on Yom Tov. The same thing with the bris. If it's Shaloi Bizmana and it doesn't have to be done on Yom Tov, you wait until the next day. That's how Rashi explains this. Abaye Omar, Abaye says there's another pasuk where we see that something that must not be done today, it's not allowed to be done in Yom Tov, even if it's a mitzvah. Omakra, Oylas Shabbos b'Shabbatay, the karbonis that have to be brought for Shabbos, whether it's the Tomid or the Musaf, that's brought on Shabbos. V'loy Oylas Chayil b'Shabbos, but not any other Oyla from the weekday, that can't be brought on Shabbos. V'loy Oylas Chayil b'Yom Tov, or any other Oyla from the weekday, it can't be brought on Yom Tov either. So the same thing with a bris, Shalei Bizmana, doesn't have to be done on Yom Tov, so it's not done on Yom Tov. Rava Omakra, the Torah says, Hu levada ye'aseh lochem. When it talks about what could be done on Yom Tov, meleches oichel nefesh, what's necessary for food, that is what could be done on Yom Tov. Hu v'lei machshirin. The word hu says only the oichel nefesh, but not preparatory steps that could be done from before, that can be done on Yom Tov. Levadai, when the Torah adds the word levadai, it's another exclusion. V'loi mila shalei bizmana, and not mila shalei bizmana, the asya mikavachimer that I would have thought could be learned out from a kavachimer. I would have thought there's a kavachimer. Rashi here says the kavachimer would have been if mila could be deichet saras, for sure it could be deichet yantif. It shows how much more chomer it is. But I don't use that kavachimer, and I say that mila cannot be done on yantif. Rav Ashi Yomar, Rav Ashi brings another drasha. Shabbosain, it says in the Torah regarding Yontif that it's Shabbosain. And I say, to keep Yontif is both a Esa and a Lois Esa. Asehu. V'havele Yontif Esa v'Lois Esa. So keeping Yontif is both an Esa and a Lois Esa. V'ein Esa doiches Lois Esa v'Asei. The mitzvah of making the bris is not going to be doiche an esa and a lois esa. Well, that's only a bris shaloi bizmana. A bris shaloi bizmana, so there's no reason to be doiche. You can wait until tomorrow. A bris that's bizmana, just like we learned out from the psukim before that it's doiche Shabbos, it's also doiche Yom Tov. Okay, now we come back to what it said in the Mishnah. So there was the machlokes of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Kiva, right? What's doiche? Is only the bris itself doiche? That's what Rabbi Kiva held, or all the preparations, if they were not done before Shabbos, are also deiche. Klal Amar Rabbi Kiva v'chol. Rabbi Kiva said whatever could have been done before Shabbos is not going to be deiche Shabbos. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav halacha Rabbi Kiva. We paskin like Rabbi Kiva. Only the bris itself can be done on Shabbos. Tanan nami gabi Pesach kai gavne. We learned also regarding a korban Pesach a similar machlokes or a similar statement of Rabbi Kiva. Klal Amar Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva says regarding the korban Pesach in a case where it has to be brought on Shabbos if it's erev Pesach on Shabbos. So Rabbi Kiva said, Kol Malacha. Someone pointed out to me that this upcoming Pesach, erev Pesach will be in Shabbos. Am I right? I think in Tafshin Pei Aleph next year. The one we had it didn't have for a long time. Erev Pesach is going to be in Shabbos. So Rabbi Kiva says, Kol Malacha. So this may be relevant. Mashiach will come. We'll bring the korban Pesach on Shabbos. So Kol Malacha she'efshar lo la'asaysa me'erev Shabbos. Any Malacha that could be done from before Shabbos for the Pesach, ein deiches a Shabbos. Does not push off Shabbos. Shchita she'efshar la'asaysa me'erev Shabbos. Shchita that cannot be done before Shabbos. That's the mitzvah to be done on that day. Deiches a Shabbos. Oh, that's what pushes off Shabbos. Rav Yehuda Rav, over there Rav said as well, halacha Rabbi Kiva, we paskin like Rabbi Kiva. So now the Gemara explains it tzricha. We need Rav to paskin like Rabbi Kiva in both instances. If you would let me know that the halacha is like Rabbi Kiva regarding Mila, I would say, Hosam, in the case of the Mila, I say, Hu the machshirin. The Bach adds, Hosam the efshe, the machshirin, the efshe, lasis me esmoil, the preparatory things could be done from yesterday. Loi dochu Shabbos, they are not going to be dochu Shabbos. Why? The lekka koris, because there's no koris for not making the bris milah today. Aval Pesach, if a person does not make the Pesach today, he's bemazed. He could make the Pesach today and he's not making it today. The Ika Kodesh, and then there's going to be Kodesh, Ein Melitcha Shabbos. I would say that for Pesach that there's Kodesh, it should push off Shabbos. V'yesh minigabi Pesach, and if I would say that only by Pesach it does not push off Shabbos to make the preparations, I would say Mishum D'Lo Nichresu Aleh Yud Gimel Brisais. Pesach is not a mitzvah that the Torah wrote 13 expressions of bris. Aval Mila, the Nechso Allah, Yud Gimel Brisais, by the bris Mila, the Torah writes those 13 expressions of bris. I would say that even if you did not make the preparations, Rabbi Kiva would agree that it should be Deicha Shabbos. Tzriche, therefore we need Rav to tell me both times that only the mitzvah itself is Deicha Shabbos and not the preparations from before. Zok the Mishnah. Oisen kol tzarchem mila b'Shabbos. You can do whatever is necessary for the bris itself on Shabbos itself. What is that? Mayalin, you make the bris, cut off the arla itself. Upayrin, you uncover. There's another thin skin that has to be removed and uncovered. That's part of the bris. The mila and the priya. Without the priya, the bris is not a bris b'chlal. Umaytzitzin, and you draw out the blood. Also, the Gemara will explain that this also has to be done as part of the bris. If not, the baby is in danger. You put these herbs on the bris to heal it. And imloy shachak me'erev Shabbos, if these herbs were not prepared from before Shabbos, loyis b'shinov, you can grind it with your teeth and prepare it for the bris. V'noisen, and you put it on the bris to heal it. And another thing that they used to do then apparently is they would take oil and wine and mix it together, and they would put it on the bris. If you didn't prepare this oil and wine, mix it from before Shabbos, so then you nasan zebatzma, you put each one separately. Again, all these things, you're preparing it on Shabbos. You're not allowed to prepare a refu on Shabbos. So therefore you prepare it, you put it separately on Shabbos. With a shinui, correct, whether it's the teeth with a shinui, or you put it separately. The Gemara will explain what separately means. Ve'ein, another thing, ve'ein oisen la chaluk lechatchili. You don't make a chaluk, which is basically a small band-aid that's used for the bris. Rashi says the band-aid is to make sure that the arla doesn't grow back. Other Rishonim say that the band-aid is for healing, otherwise it's a sakana. Aval, koyrech aleh smartut, you can take a little piece of a shmata, and you can use it for the bris. And imloy hiskim out of Shabbos, if you didn't bring it from before Shabbos and you have to carry it for the baby to bring from the Rosh Hashanah, so you have a very simple eitzah. You can wrap this piece of shmata on your finger, or maybe you have a film of chatzah acheres, and you can bring it from another chatzah. You can bring it to the bris because now you're wearing it as a garment, so you can bring it for the bris for the baby. Talk to Gemara. Mechti, let's see pshat here in the Mishnah. Katani kulu. It says in the Mishnah all the details of the bris. The milah. Every bris consists usually of three things. There's the milah, there's the priya, and there's the mitzitza. Right? And then the Mishnah adds the other details that you also have to do for the healing of the bris. So everything is mentioned. So kol tzarche milah lasuya mai. Then the Mishnah says you can do all tzarche milah. What is it saying by that? If it spells out everything afterwards, what is this coming to include? After the Gemara, it comes to include this that we learned in the Braisa. Hamal, a person that's making a bris. Kolzman shu oisik b'mila, as long as he's still the moil, as long as his hands are still occupied in doing the bris. Chayzer, bein al tzitzin ha'ma'akvenes hamila, bein al tzitzin she'ein ma'akvenes hamila. If there's parts of the arla that wasn't completely cut off, whether it's those parts of the arla that if you don't take it off, the bris is not a bris. It hasn't been taken off properly. Or even if it's parts of the arla, even without taking them off, the bris would be kosher. Either way, you could continue making the bris. You can complete it. Because you're still in the middle. Your hands are still in the middle of doing it and still in the middle of cutting, even if you already finished doing a part where it's a kosher bris, you could continue until the end when you get rid of the arla entirely. Pirish, how about if the moil's hands were removed, the action of the bris, he stopped. So then, al tzitzin ma'akvin, if there's a part of the arla that's left there, that's ma'akiv, it's without taking this off, the bris is not a bris, ma'akvin is hamila chayzer. For that you can go again, even though it's like you're starting again, you're doing a new action. You're starting again, but it doesn't matter. This is something which is ma'akiv the bris. You're allowed to start again. Al tzitzin she'ein ma'akvin, but if there's a part of the arla that's left there, but it's not ma'akiv, the bris is already kosher, even though it's not the best, but it's not ma'akiv, ein ma'akvin es hamila, ein chayzer. Once you remove your hands, you don't go back, you can't be machal Shabbos to go back. So Rashi's pshat, many Rishonim pshat in this Gemara is, this Braisa is all talking about Shabbos. Regarding Shabbos, when a moil did the bris and he removed his hand and he noticed that he left over something, he has to look to see what it is that he left over. If it's something that he left over that's ma'akiv the bris, he can go back. If not, he can't go back anymore. It's not Teiche Shabbos to take off something which is not ma'akev the bris. The Rambam learns that this bris here is being brought up in our sugya in connection to kol tzarchim milah, and the Mishnah was talking about Shabbos, but this bris is even talking about the mitzvah of milah b'chlal. That you don't have to go back if it's not ma'akev. Man Tana, who's the Tana of this brisa that says that there's a difference whether you're in the middle of the action or the action was stopped and you're starting again, and it's considered to be like a new action, and therefore you can't go back if it's not ma'akev? Who's the Tana of this concept? Pirish ein a chayzer, that once you separated your hand, you can't go back. Amar Rabba Baba Chana, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, Rabbi Shmuel ben Noish, Rabbi Yechanan ben Breike. This is Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yechanan ben Breike, regarding a carbon Pesach. And we once learned this before. The Tanya we learned in the Braisa. Our boss, the Shechali, is b'Shabbos. So Erev Pesach falls out in Shabbos. So one of the things they had to do with the carbon Pesach was they had to remove the skin of the animal to be able to take out the parts that are going to be brought on the Mizbeach. So the machlokes is how much of the skin could be removed. So the Rabbi Shmuel says, Mafshit Adam HaPesach Ad HaChaza, you could only remove the skin up until the breast, and then you're able to take out the parts on the Mizbeach, and not more than that. You can't come back afterwards and continue removing the skin completely. Chachamim say, no, you could remove the skin entirely. Even though, so what happened over here? The person removes the skin until the breast, he's able to then he takes out the parts of the animal for the Mizbeach. So his hand stopped doing the action of removing the skin. So Rabbi Shmuel says, your hand stopped doing that action, you can't come back now and continue taking off the hide of the animal. You already stopped. Your hand stopped doing that action, you can't continue. Chachamim say, no, even though your hand stopped doing that action, you took out the pieces that are needed for the Mizbeach, you could continue, you could remove the skin entirely. So Rabbi Shmuel is the one that's saying that once your hands stop the action of taking off the hide of the animal, you can't continue. So we say the same thing over here, benegaya to the Milah. The moil that's making the bris, once his hands stop doing the action of the bris, he can't continue making the bris anymore, to take off another part that's not needed for the bris. Sagt the Gemara,
on Sunday?
On Sunday, yes. Yeah. Sagt the Gemara, Mimai, from where do we know that there's a how do you compare that case of the carbon Pesach to the bris? You know why in that case Rabbi Shmuel says you can't continue removing the skin of the animal. Mishum, is that a mitzvah? To remove the skin of the animal, is that itself a mitzvah? No. So Mishum, the loy be'inon zeh keli vanveyu. There's no Indian of continuing to remove the skin of the animal once your hand was removed. Aval hacha, but over here, when it comes to the mitzvah of the bris, the be'inon zeh keli vanveyu. Over here, the Torah says to remove the arla. You could remove the arla just about, or you can remove the arla entirely. That's what we call a heder mitzvah. You're beautifying, you're doing the mitzvah fully. So over here, maybe in this case, Rabbi Shmuel would agree that even on Shabbos, you could return, even after you stop the action, you could return to remove the arla entirely for the heder mitzvah, to remove it all the way. Hachanami, over here you would agree. And the Gemara brings the source. This is the Gemara where one of the places, the source of this mitzvah, of the concept of hidden mitzvah, to beautify a mitzvah. The Tanya we learned in Abraisa, Zeg Keli Vanveyu. When the pasuk says, this is the Eibishter and I will beautify him. What does this mean? His snah lefan of the mitzvahs. You beautify the Eibishter through his beautifying his mitzvahs. Asay lefan of sukkah, you make a beautiful sukkah. Right? And Minik Chabad is that the beautiful sukkah is not the decorations in the sukkah. It's the sukkah itself, or the people sitting in the sukkah, the divrei Torah in the sukkah. You beautify the sukkah. Lulav na, beautiful lulav. Shofar na, beautiful shofar. Tzitzis na, beautiful tzitzis. Sefer Torah na, a beautiful Sefer Torah. And here the Braisa spells out more specifically what a beautiful Sefer Torah consists of. The kasav by l'shmai b'dyoyna, you write the Eibish's names in it. You write it l'shma with a beautiful ink. Kulmasna, a beautiful feather. Belavler uman, a cipher that's a uman that knows how to write the letters beautiful. And also v'koychai b'shiraynain, and it should be wrapped in a nice, beautiful mantle for the beauty of the Sefer Torah. So this is the mitzvah of hiddur. This is the concept of hiddur mitzvah. You see from this Gemara, and the Rebbe brings it in the letter as well, that the concept of hiddur mitzvah is not some kind of a hiddur of Chazal, or I don't know, a minig to be mahadir in a mitzvah. It's a minat Torah. It's a bepashtus, it's mashma, it's a source in a pasuk in the Torah. The concept of hiddur mitzvah, it's not ma'akiv, but it's minat Torah. It's that kelev anveyu. Abishal actually has a different pshat on what Vanveyu means. Vanveyu means have it doimeloi. You and the Eibusha should be similar. Go in the Eibusha's ways. Ma'hu chanavarachum. The Eibusha is graceful and merciful. Afata yechanavarachum. You should go in the Eibusha's ways and have rachmanis as well. Okay, so Abishal learned it in a different typhon. Kopana, the point of the Gemara was you can't compare the Karban Pesach, where taking off the skin is not a mitzvah, to doing the bris, where taking off the arla is a mitzvah. Over here, maybe Rabbi Shmuel would agree that even after you stop, you could come back to the action. So the Gemara continues and says, Elam Ravashi. Ravashi says there's a source of another Tana. Hamani Rabbi Yosi. We have another case of what Rabbi Yosi said. The Tanan we learned in a Mishnah. This is benegeh to the Eidim that see the Levana, and they are allowed to be Machal Shabbos, to come to tell the Bezdin of the new moon that they saw. So the Mishnah says, Bein Shenir Ba'alil, whether the moon was seen very, very clearly, and everybody basically saw it, the Bezdin, everybody for sure saw it. Bein Shaloi Nir Ba'alil, whether it was not seen clearly, and perhaps only the Eidim saw it. Machalin Olavis HaShabbos, the Eidim are allowed to go and be Machal Shabbos, to say testimony that they saw the new moon. Rabbi Yosi says, Im nire ba'alil, if the moon was so clear, that ein machal nolavis Shabbos. They can't be machal Shabbos because it was seen clearly. And Bezdin saw it as well. Why should they go be machal Shabbos to tell the Bezdin about it? So the Gemara now is thinking that we can use Rabbi Yosi's opinion, the same thing over here for the bris. If the bris is already done, it's kosher. The bris is kosher. The leftovers that are there are not ma'akiv, so how could I be doiche Shabbos for something that's not ma'akiv? Just like over here, we don't need these eidim, so therefore it's not ma'akiv, so they can't be machal Shabbos. So again the Gemara says there's no comparison. Mimai, how could you compare the two? Dilme at kind of like Rabbi Yosi Hassam. You know why Rabbi Yosi over there said that the eidim don't come, so the Bach adds Elo mishum de lenitna Shabbos lidachis. Because over there, in such a case, when the moon is so clear, the Bezdin, everybody saw it, so there's no reason to be doiche Shabbos in the first place. Everybody saw the new moon already. Aval hacha the nitna Shabbos lidachis. Here we're talking about a bris that for the etzem bris itself, you are being doiche Shabbos, you're making the bris on Shabbos. So hachanami, maybe here Rabbi Yosi would hold that even to just continue the bris after you stopped and do the parts that are not necessary, maybe it would be allowed because this is something that's doiche Shabbos. So we can't use what Rabbi Yosi said as a source for what we're saying here. Gemara brings a third source from one of the Avedis in the Beis HaMikdash. El Amri Nerdoi, Rabbanon, the Pligi Aleh, the Rabbi Yosi, the Rabbanon that argued and Rabbi Yosi in a different Mishnah, that's the source here. The Tnan, we learned in another Mishnah regarding the Lechem Hapanim in the Beis HaMikdash. This Mishnah describes how the Lechem Hapanim was brought into the Shulchan every Shabbos. How did they put it down? What was the process? So the Mishnah says as follows. Arba Kayanim, there were 4 Kayanim, Nechnasim, that entered into the Beis HaMikdash. What were these 4 Kayanim needed for? Shnayim, biyodam shnei zdarim. 2 of the Kayanim were holding in their hands the 2 zdarim, the 2 sides of the Lechem Hapanim. There were 6 and 6, right? So 2 of them were holding the 6 of the Lechem Hapanim. And Shnayim, another 2 of the Kayanim, biyodam shnei bazichin. They were holding the 2 bazichin, which was the incense, the levina, that was placed over there on the shulchan. So you had 4 kainim in total to come and bring the fresh lechem hapanim and to bring the fresh bazichin for the shulchan. Now, va'arba magdim lifneim, there was another 4 kainim that came in advance ahead of them. They were there to remove the old lechem hapanim and the old bezichin. Shnayim, 2 little shnei zdarim, 2 of the kainim that went ahead were there to remove the lechem hapanim that was there from before. Vishnayim little shnei bezichin, and 2 to remove the 2 bezichin. Hamachnisin oimdim b'tzafain. The ones that are gonna put the bread in, the new lechem hapanim in, stand at the tzafin side of the shulchan, upneim l'darim, facing towards darim. Va'amitziim, the ones that are taking out the old lechem hapanim, oimdim b'darim, they stand on the darim side of the shulchan, upneim l'tzafin, and they're facing towards tzafin. Now, what's the process of removing the old lechem hapanim and putting in the new one? So the Tana Kama here, Rabbanon say, Elu moishchin ve'elu manichin. The ones that are pulling out and the ones that are putting in, it happens together. Tifchei shel zeh b'tzad tifchei shel zeh. It has to be like in one action, in one connection. The Torah, shouldn't be any time where there shouldn't be the lechem hapanim on the shulchan. Right? Why? As it says right away, Mishum shenemar lefnei Hashem or lefanai tomid. The bread has to be there, the lechem hapanim has to be there tomid. So there can't be any break in between. If there's a break in between, it's two different actions, it's not tamid. It has to be one hemshech. That's how the process, how they took it off. Rabbi Yossi disagrees. Rabbi Yossi oimer afila elu noitlin ve'elu manichin afse hayatamid. That doesn't have to be done in this way. There could be one group of kohanim that comes in, removes the lechem aparim, removes the bezichin, they leave. Another group of kohanim come in afterwards and they place the new lechem aparim. Even if there's an hour in between, even if it's two actions, it's still called tamid. It's still on the same day, the same time, they put down the bread, it's called tamid. So the Gemara is bringing a source from the Tana Kama. The Tana Kama says, in order for it to be tamid, there has to be one hemshech. If there's a break, if it's two actions, it's not tamid. It's two separate things. Rabbi Yossi says, even if it's two actions, it's still considered to be tamid. So we apply the same thing to a moil that's making a bris. If a moil's action in doing the bris is divided into two actions, he made the bris itself and then there was leftovers and he comes back to do another part, it's two different actions, and if it's a part that's left over that's not ma'akiv, it's not allowed. Tana Rabbana, we learned in Abraisa, mahalketenes amila. The moil has to make sure to cut off the mila properly, that all the parts of the arla should be off. He has to trim it off completely. Vimlay hilkit, and if he did not, onish koris. He's going to be chayev koris. So the Gemara asks the question, Mani, who's going to be chayev koris? Amar Rav Kahana uman. The moil himself is going to be chayev koris if he doesn't cut off the mila properly. So before I go right in the Gemara, let me just mention an interesting word that the Rebbe says regarding this Gemara. The Rebbe says that this whole thing, that Mila is Doiche Shabbos, that we're learning over here in the Gemara, so B'derech Remez, you could say, that you see from this Gemara, a Meire de thing. A Moil that's making a bris on Shabbos, so yeah, we can say that Mila is Doiche Shabbos, but there's always that slight chance that he's going to make the bris, and he doesn't do the bris properly, and then, if it's not a bris properly, it's just a chabura. He ends up being chayiv koris for being machal Shabbos. So we see here that one yid has to be ready to do something for the ruchnius of another yid, even in a case that he puts his own ruchnius at stake. That could be, he'll be a chayiv koris himself. And the Rebbe says, from here you see the point when you get to this in that Mila is Doiche Shabbos. The reason why Mila is Doiche Shabbos is because Mila is a mitzvah that's really higher than all the other mitzvahs. It's brought in the Maim of the Alter Rebbe and Teirah that Mila is L'mayla Mishtal. It's higher even than the name Avaya. Mila is a mitzvah that's higher than everything. It expresses the Mesiris Nefesh of a Yid, the connection of Yid to the Eibishter that comes from Avram Avinu. And therefore this is a kind of mitzvah that's Doiche even Shabbos. And it's also expressed in the fact that it could even be possible, as you see here in the Gemara, although this is obviously not likely, but it could be possible that it'll make the bris, and the bris won't be a bris, and it'll end up being Machal Shabbos. But the Gemara here questions this. The Gemara says, wait a minute, what case are we talking about that the moil would be Chayev Koris? Maskef Lorav Papa, why would, if a moil made a bris on Shabbos, and the bris was not done properly, he only did half of it, why would the moil be Chayev Koris for being Machal Shabbos? Leime Uma, again, Maskalora Papa, Uman, this moil, this person doing the bris, Leime Luhu, let him say to the people there, Ana of the Palga de Mitzvah, I made half of the bris, Ato Navdisu Palga de Mitzvah, you can complete it and do the other half. Why should the moil be Chayev Kodesh for making half of the bris? Taki, he only did half, but someone else could complete the other half, and then it'll be a full bris. So it's not a Chilul Shabbos. He began the mitzvah, let them complete the mitzvah. So therefore, Elam Rav Papa says, the pshat on this bris is different. Gadol, we're talking about a gadol, we're not talking b'chlal about Shabbos, we're talking about, it's not nothing to do with Shabbos, we're talking about a gadol, the person himself that only has a half a bris. The bris is saying, if you have a bris that wasn't done properly, then if this person himself dies without ever completing the bris, he will be chayiv kodesh, not the kodesh of Shabbos, the kodesh of not making the bris properly. That's what we're talking about. Nothing to do with Shabbos. That was our Papa's pshat. So the Gemara asks on this, Maskef Lo Rav Ashi, Gadol, we're talking stam about a person that had a half a bris. The Torah says, V'aral Zachar, Hasher Lo Yimoil. So the conclusion of the pasuk is V'nichrasa, that he's chayav kodesh. Obviously, if you only make a half a bris, you're chayav kodesh. What's the chiddush over here? Elam Rav Ashi, so Rav Ashi goes back to Shabbos. Rav Ashi says this brisa is talking about Shabbos. La'olam Uman, we're talking about the moil that would be chayav kodesh. Which kodesh? The kodesh for being machal Shabbos. What's the case? So before we said the moil could argue, I did half of the bris and you do the other half, so what did I do wrong? So Rav Ashi explains, they waited to make the bris until very, very late in the day. They basically made it right before Shkia. It got so late, so people told the Moel, don't make the bris now. You're not going to be able to complete the bris. You're not going to be able to do the whole bris on Shabbos, and if you can't do the whole bris on Shabbos, the action that you're going to be doing on Shabbos will just be a chabura. It's not a bris. And the Moel says, no, don't worry, mesapikna, va'aved. I'll be able to do the whole bris still on Shabbos. V'lo yistapik, and he couldn't do the whole bris on Shabbos. V'ishtakech, and it comes out in the end, the chabura hu avad, that he made a chabura on Shabbos and v'onish kares, and therefore he gets the einish kares of not making the full bris on Shabbos. That's the case that this bris was speaking about.
Well, you didn't say lamsapik.
So then it's not a, no, but the reason why the Gemara adds that detail is because it has to be a mazid in order to be chayav kares. That's why it adds that. Okay, we'll stop here for now.